Hi and welcome to All Things Marvelous. I'm John Paul, and in this video I'm going to show you how I made a Blender plugin using AI. I did it to try and solve a problem I was having in converting a geometry node setup into animation keyframes. There are a few options out there to do something similar, but there didn't seem to be a way of maintaining the mesh data and the point of origin for the shape. So if you've ever wanted to know how to do something like this, or you just want to know how to convert a geometry node setup into keyframes, then let's get into the video and I can show you what happened. So this whole thing started as I was flicking through Instagram like you do. And I came across this amazing artwork by Oscar Peterson. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. And as you can see, it's just two ovals slowly rolling along, which looks pretty simple. And I thought it looked really cool. And I thought, well, why don't I try doing something like that in Blender? By the way, please go and check out his artwork. He's a really amazing artist and I'll put a link in the description. So I jumped into Blender and I set about creating an oval. And as you can see, I thought, well, why don't I just try animating it using keyframes? But I found out quite quickly that this is really hard. Not only to get the action right, but to make sure that it stays on the ground and to make sure it rolls the right amount of times and all of those sort of things. You could sit here for ages trying to play with the curves, trying to make it go the right distance, but ultimately I was thinking there must be an easier way of doing this than trying to do it manually. Because it might work, but it's probably going to be quite a bit of a headache. So with a quick Googling, I found two really amazing tutorials that show you how to do these things using geometry nodes. This one by Yesway, and as you can see, he's got a technique of finding the edges of anything and being able to roll around the ground. And then there's another one by Duncan, and his is a similar technique. It's a little bit more complicated again and using simulation nodes. So using these two examples, I jumped back into Blender and set about doing it. And it was pretty easy, to be honest. This is the first one and it uses this control system. And as you can see, it rolls it nice and smooth and it's on the ground plane, which is brilliant. And then there was this one. And this one does exactly the same and it moves it nice and smooth again along the ground plane and it follows the circumference of the oval. But the main problem I have with this is really what we want to do. If you go back to the artwork, you'll see there's a thing that joins them together. And these are centered in the middle of the geometry. And this is like a piston that gets smaller and bigger. You can do that sort of thing using bones and IK, or limit rotations and track constraints. But basically, to do that, you need to be able to parent to the middle of the geometry. With all of these techniques that use geometry nodes, the center of the mesh is always where the geometry node starts and doesn't actually follow the mesh. It doesn't actually link anything to the mesh. So if you were to parent something to this, if I get a plane for instance, and that mesh moves, that plane doesn't move anywhere. So this wasn't what we needed. And that happens the same for this one. As you can see, it just leaves the plane there. So I had to really think about how I was going to do this, and ultimately what we needed is to be able to take the geometry nodes and bake it into keyframes. Now there are a few solutions out there, and two of the main solutions are baking it to an Olympic or baking it to shape keys. So if you bake it to an Olympic, which is a media cache, as you can see, if I roll it forward again, the origin stays where it is. The origin doesn't move with it. So again, it's not what we need. It really won't help us in our journey to make this happen. And if you use shape keys again, it's great and you can see the shape keys here, which is basically just moving from one to another. And as you can see, it's just going down the list. But again, the origin stays where it is. So we can't parent anything to these. It's just not what we need. What we need to be able to do is parent the actual keyframes of the mesh. So that's where the journey into AI started. I thought, well look, I can't find a plugin anywhere or a tutorial that tells me how to do this, but surely AI must be able to solve it, right? So I jumped back on the web and I remembered a podcast hearing about this thing called Replit. And it's just basically an AI that will help you in building any sort of code program software, iPhone app or anything like that. So surely making a Blender plugin should be straightforward, you would think. So the journey was long, very long. Let me grab this and go all the way up here. Oh god, there's even more. Let me keep on going away to the top. So here we are. Then we get to the very top and I say, I want to create a Blender plugin that converts geometry nodes animation into a keyframed mesh. And the journey had started. And off it went, starting to build an app. First, it wasn't viewable in the end panel. Then I did this bit here and it just didn't show up. Then we got it to show up, but it was in the wrong section. Then we had to put it in the tool section. Then we got it to show up, but there was a code mistake and it just didn't do what it was supposed to. And then it didn't convert it to a mesh. Then the mesh had no actual mesh. Then it was still not working because it didn't make an object. And then it just hung and froze, and so on and so on and so on. Until finally, 2 days later, we got a thing that nearly worked. But the location wasn't being transferred. The first thing we got back was this really weird thing that I'd never seen before. It basically had a mesh. It had an output of vertex animations, and the data is actually stored down here with the animation. But it's keyframed vertices over the whole thing, which as you can see just looks crazy. I mean, it works, but as you can see again, the origin hasn't moved, so it was pointless. It's not what we needed and not what we can use. So I jump back into it again and I keep on going. That made it worse. Now we get a final mesh that was static and that didn't move. It didn't have the correct location. I kept going until finally I got something that kind of worked. I think it was about maybe 2.5 days, 3 days into trying to program it, or prompt it if you like. And now it was going one way that it shouldn't have gone, and it didn't quite go the full 360. And I kept on sending it screenshots showing that it wasn't working, and then we went back and forth, and finally we got something that worked. And what output was these things here. If I just take away this, and for now that, actually I'll just show you. So this is the geometry nodes that I wanted to copy. And if I move the timeline, you can see that it's nice and on the floor, and this is my app that I created. So you have this selection here to change the math algorithm. There was many math algorithms that we went through to try and make it copy the rotation, and ultimately it ended up on this one, which is called the Kabash algorithm, or Kabash I think, which is a way of working out the rotation using vertex mesh data from the data matrices. Ultimately, what we get now, if we click the nodes and click convert, it copies the data from the rolling and kicks out a new keyframed mesh that follows the rotation as we want to, which is brilliant. It is really good, and through a few more iterations and a few more trial and errors, I managed to get it to do even complex meshes such as a Suzanne. As you can see, I can take this Suzanne, I put it through my mesh converter, and now we have a keyframed animation. And as you can see, even a really complex mesh like a Suzanne, it copied perfectly, which is an amazing result. So what this meant is, as you can see, the geometry is actually with the mesh. So if we add a plane, and this time, if we parent the plane to the mesh, the thing moves just how we want it to. So we're able to take the oval again and parent it, and now we have something that follows the middle of the mesh just like that. And from there, we can go on to replicate what we needed to do in the very first place, which was what this was all about. Okay, so we have the animations of the two ovals exactly following the floor like we want, but crucially, we now have mechanisms inside which follow the origins of the middle of the oval. And what we can do with that is we can add constraints. And this was the whole point about why we made an AI plugin. The first thing I tried was adding a damped constraint. The problem with this is if I move it, what you'll see is if we go from frame to frame like this, you can see that we are misaligned until I let go of the mouse. And this happens when you start a render. So it kind of works, but it leads us to some really janky animation like this. So I had to figure out a different way of doing it. But we had our points to be able to try and figure out how to make this animation work. So the best way to make this system work is using an armature and stretchy bones. As you can see, if I go into pose mode, what we have is a set bone on both sides and two stretchy bones in the middle, which means if I move this, you can see that it stretches but doesn't stretch the mesh, but allows them always to be in line with each other as they travel around. What you can then do is parent these bones to the cylinders in the middle, then these ones you can parent to those meshes. That means you have your animation moving, the frame doesn't jerk and totally stays in line all the way as the animation goes round, which is great. We managed to achieve it, and we managed to make our own AI plugin. I will say there is one caveat with this whole thing, which I'll be trying to figure out before this video goes out, but I'll also make the plugin available for free so you can download and try it yourself. As you can see from the graph editor, what should be happening to get a full 360, this line should be continuing all the way up. And instead, it's actually getting to about 180, then flipping all the way back around 180 and continuing the animation from there, which looks okay, works okay, and is fine for the animation, but may cause problems with simulations. This can be seen more clear when you look at the Suzanne animations. I just have to do the conversion again. The conversion is pretty fast, as you can see. So if I go to the keyframe Suzanne, as you can see, every time you see a big line transition like this, it's actually flipping, going around 180 back to where it should be to continue that circular motion. It looks like the animation is correct and the parenting still works correctly, but ultimately, I think if you were going to use something like cables or something attached to it with a physics simulation, it may not work properly. But I will try and fix that before the video comes out. And the other thing you can do with the plugin, there are 3 options you have. For some geometry nodes animations, they mutate into different shapes. So there's an option for shape keys, so that will give you an output where the animation is all just shape keys. And then finally, you can get an output of separated objects. And this would be useful for stop motion keyframes where you need to output every single one as a separate mesh. Thanks for sticking around till the end. I hope you liked the video. As I mentioned, I'll stick the plugin link in the description so you can download it for free and try it for yourself. I'd love to hear your comments and how you get on with it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video.